divorces. I mean, often religions will actually exile a person from their religion because they've been divorced. And if not literal exile, it will be communal exile. It'll be everyone will talk about them. And so all these things shape when we're attached to a relationship, which, you think about romantic relationships are obviously different than friendships in that we're potentially creating a family with them. We're potentially sharing a life with them. That's a lot of shared time. That's a lot of shared meals. That's a lot of shared moments. And that, puts a lot more weight, or we might be more attached because it is more destabilizing to know your partner and your relationship might end. And I think part of the biological process of processing heartbreak is the recognition that a story we thought was going to happen is no longer happening. And when they look at the research at people's brains, they light up in the same place when they think about their ex as a cocaine addict. So, right. We kind of become addicted to them. And so part of the physiological processes of losing a romantic partner is the story, the possibility. We don't realize that although the story and how we envisioned it is changing and the person we're with is maybe not that person anymore, we can still create that life, and we think it's the death of the whole future rather than just how it looks. And part of the attachment to how it needs to look is what makes us hold on and stay static in relationship. And one of the things I've argued for a long time is because we're so afraid of relationships ending, we actually oscillate and participate in the relationship in a way that reduces the amount of friction in the relationship because we're afraid this conversation might end the relationship, not seeing that that's the same conversation that also would deepen it or invite it to deepen.
The idea that all relationships, are selfish in nature and self-serving.
True, because you think we're always getting something from it. And
even the self-abandonment is selfish because you just want to be with them. So it's really self-serving. It's not, you know what I mean? Like everything is to serve the self and what you think will make you happier or feel better.
And that's why survival-based behaviors or mechanisms that we learn from childhood to self-abandon, to people please, to even overtly individuate and become an island that never gets connection, they're all ways to protect us from being hurt and also to ensure connection. Most of us, till we do, most of us don't know how do I hold on to a self and be in relationship to another person. We often either put at cost our relationship to ourself for the connection to other or the connection to other at the cost to self. So it's either one or the other. We don't we don't know how to do both. How do I hold on to me and be in love with you and allow you and me too? That's hard.
I would imagine those are secure attachment as those rare unicorns that can find the balance. And then there's the
whoever those people are.
I don't know them. I've never met one. No, I'm sure I have. But the anxious attachment, which would be abandoning abandoning yourself for the other person for the connection, and then the avoidant would be. Are those the sort of categories that you're implying when you say that the avoidant would abandon the relationship for the self?
Yeah, exactly. Are your listeners familiar with attachment theory and all that?
Yeah. Somewhat. I'm sure we get some new people here and there, but I've definitely broached it many times with different people. But if you want to give a quick overview, I think that's always great.
Yeah, essentially what you're saying, a secure attachment is the sort of defining characteristic is my partner's needs or the other person's needs matter as much as my own. And so not more than my own, which would be more anxious attachment, not less than my own, which would be more avoidant. And, the beautiful thing is no matter what we might think our attachment style is, it can change. So when someone learns it, they often say, I'm anxiously attached. No, you're just prone to anxious attachment. But if you say I am, then you're going to stay in it, right? You can't identify with the thing. So all of us can learn secure attachment. It's based on research by Jonathan Bowlby originally, and they had a mom with a baby, and the mom would leave the room and come back, and then they'd observe how did baby interact with mom. When the mom came back and the baby was like anxious, attaches to mom, it's like, when you leave, I'm not sure you're coming back is essentially the behavior. So as soon as mom comes back into the room, they don't leave mom's side. So there's not really a trust there. The second one, mom leaves, mom comes back, baby's like, hey, what's up? Reconnects with mom, goes back to playing. That's more secure. And the last one, more avoidant. Mom leaves, mom comes back, baby's like, didn't even really know you were gone, not a big deal. acts as if it's not affecting them, but internally, physiologically, they're experiencing the same thing as the anxious child. So you could think about it like anxious people get triggered by space in relationship.
Yeah.
Avoidant people get triggered by a lack of space. So both are experiencing insecure attachment. They're just protecting themselves from hurt in opposite ways.
Exactly.
Right. So you're right, though. You're dead on. Like the avoidant will distance from the relationship to protect self. So the cost is the relationship, not the self, as opposed to an anxious person is like becomes a doormat.
Which kind of points in the direction of like child work, inner child work. I think there's a lot of people that don't do any of this, but is it essential if you are growing in a relationship to do inner child work, to understand your patterns, to understand your attachment style and all that stuff? Because it just seems like when you know, it's really part of your life. And I can remember old times in my life where I had no idea what any of this was. And I just sort of took everything personally and it was everybody else's fault, but it's not a lot of joy either. So.
Oh man, that was so me too. Like when I think about being in high school or university, how I was normally more of anxious, secure, and then I got really hurt and betrayed, and then I became very avoidant. And that's why it's so easy to oscillate between the two, anxious and avoidant, because you don't have to learn security, right? They're both insecure attachment styles, so you don't have to become secure. And that was when I was 19. So my attachment style dramatically changed at 19. And that was because after experiencing betrayal, I made it mean that when I love people, they betray me. And, here I am, not making out on dance floors while my buddies some of them are doing that and talking about it. And I'm like, no one's in a locker room being like, man, monogamy is the best. Like my partner and I, we had a deeper conversation and we found another level of intimacy. Like that's not often the conversation that's going on in a locker room.
Really for many more decades after that.
Right. And relational awareness only can't, I originally used to actually be in sales, but also teach sales techniques and all that kind of stuff. And, when I went through a breakup, I thought to myself, why am I so good at talking about all these things, but not my feelings? Like that's not a skill set issue. There's something else going on here. And so that was the beginning of my journey of wanting to understand romantic relationships, which inevitably, if you begin to understand romantic relationships, every relationship will improve, because it's just a magnifying glass of the things you don't do well. And I believe there might be people who don't believe what we believe, because I totally agree with you. I think people can create really fulfilling relationships without any awareness of why they do what they do. They just happen to be modeled really healthy relational dynamics. That doesn't tend to be the norm. And I would even say what we're modeled by Disney or romantic comedies or romantic movies tends to be codependency, tends to be like self-abandonment, like the woman's laying on the tracks or up in the tower waiting to be saved. So one is needing to be saved and the other one always needs to be a knight. There's just so much of that bullshit that goes on in the unconscious. And even our roles that we took on in our families as kids, we often try to take on in our romantic relationships. So, I think both people to have deeply fulfilling relationships need to have awareness of what their limitations are and where their skill sets aren't. Because we don't learn this shit in school. Like you didn't, like I started a podcast about it too. And I started writing about it because I was like, I got to learn this stuff. Like this is more important than whether I have a sales award. I'd rather have a stable romantic relationship. The interesting thing is you'll likely get the sales award.
Totally.
That's the irony.
It starts at home, and there's so much happiness driven from like your emotional position of where you're at. I think the real question with that is how, right? I think even if someone says, oh yeah, I want to learn about myself, or I want to do a good job, or I want to know, how, you've been doing this longer than I have for sure, but even just my experience, you have to really be driven to excavate. You have to be driven to dig into your psyche and your patterns and analyze your family, which I'm sure has been hurtful at times, totally. I know I've hurt my family in the process, my parents, especially, and I mean, and I always have love and reverence for them, but your patterns come from them. So like, what does someone do if they are hearing it and they feel like, oh, I have these, I'm not in a relationship or I'm not happy. And, what does someone do to become aware? Awareness is hard.
Right. I think that ability to have awareness of your awareness, right? To be aware of your patterns, to be willing to ask questions. I mean, I think the birth of awareness is asking the question or the feeling, I think there's more to this. I feel like I'm tired of this pattern. I'm tired of this feeling. It usually, that's kind of the crazy thing about being human. Maybe it's true about being a dog too. I don't know. But what's crazy about being human is we tend to wait till we have to change, or we're in some space where it hurts so much that we have to listen or do research. And, I think you're dead on. You start to learn about your family, and then all of a sudden you're like, my childhood was effed, or like this was that. And you might have anger towards your parents. And I think one thing that allows us in the exploration and the excavation of these things is to see our parents as the children of parents, because then we start to see that, they were handed down the same thing. And, where do you begin? For me, it's always been following the breadcrumbs. I feel like when you ask the question, much like that saying is, when the student's ready, the teacher arrives. And I think that's true. I have had so many incredible teachers that have no idea they were my teachers. A lot of them just from reading their books or consuming their information, where I got to learn about something I was curious about. And, that's your podcast is an incredible example of that. And, there's so many resources available to us. It might be someone today gets this inkling of, oh, inner child, what the hell is an inner child, And then they could literally just Google that and find out what that means. I think that's a beautiful thing about where we're at today.
I think you're right.